And we're there. Good morning, good evening, gentlies and ladymen, and welcome. Welcome, and good to see you. It is Sunday early in the morning. My time, 2 o'clock. Hello, Chris. Hello, Ronnie. Hello, Ilva. Hello, Sonia. Um, oder guten Morgen. Guten Morgen. Alles. Anyway, so here I am. There I am. Sorry, I'm always distracted by seeing myself in these things. It's a horrifying thing. I don't know why any of you are doing it, but that's up to you. I can't stop you. We are here. We are live. It is, as I said, about a minute after 2 o'clock in the morning here on the west coast of the U.S. of A., namely California. Santa Cruz area, which is, for those of you who don't know, the U.S. of A. and specifically California. It's about it's about an hour south of San Francisco. It's just the other side of the hill from Silicon Valley. It's part of where I grew up, and it's a very nice place. I'm very happy here. As far as I know, everybody else in the household is happy too. We are all still well, despite the hijinks, shenanigans, and outright stupidity of some folks who are still not taking the pandemic seriously after months and huge economic losses and everything else. There's still people that are like, oh, it's not a problem, man. I'm not going to get sick, or even if I do, it's just, it's like, good God, you don't understand anything. Meanwhile, everything else goes on, all kinds of interesting looking again at various social institutions in America and elsewhere, and people beginning to pay attention to a lot of the inherent racism in systems. So that is going on as well at the same time, which makes for a very interesting combination. It's a strange, fascinating time to be alive. And indoors, I hasten to say. But other than that, not a huge amount to report. I am personally still just working away. I basically finished not quite my final draft, but a pretty finalized draft of my short novel called Brothers of the Wind, which was previously going to be called something like The Shadow of Things to Come, which was for me only ever a placeholder, although some others around me liked it, but I wasn't all that thrilled with it anyway. So it's called Brothers of the Wind. It is the fifth book of the Last King of Ostenard trilogy, but it's one of the two short ones. It started out with a short one called The Heart of What Was Lost, and then there's been Witchwood Crown and I almost said Empire Strikes Back, Empire of Grass, and then I'm working on Navigator's Children, but because of the pandemic and other things, the release date for that has been put back. So into the middle of that, I have inserted the fifth book, another short volume called Brothers of the Wind, which I've now more or less finished my main first draft on, and sent that off to my publishers and other readers who will tell me all the things I've screwed up about Ostenard because they know it better than I do, like Ilva, who's one of the people on this broadcast, and one of the Rons, who I don't know if is here tonight, but is also one of the people who lets me know when I screw up. So, and of course, me being me, I screw up all the time. It's hilarious because it's my stuff. I wrote it, I invented it, and yet they're constantly having to tell me when they read my first drafts, Tad, you can't do that. Tad, you said back in such and such that that can't happen, or that didn't happen that way, or so basically, I'm in a death struggle against myself almost all the time with these books, which is unfortunate because one of the reasons I became a fantasy writer in the first place is because I could be as close to history as I wanted to be, but then I could also just go, hey, it's a fantasy novel. I made it up. So, but when you're going back to your own work, especially something where the detail was as complex as the first set of Ostenard books and the subsequent Ostenard fiction since then, you're asking for trouble. So as I said, I'm in a death struggle with my own previous writings, but that's okay. That actually adds to the excitement and fun. So, speaking of writings and old writings, of course, for those of you who are not aware and who happen to be just tuning in, who might just be flicking through Facebook and saw this, or flicking through Twitter and saw this, I am actually reading my very first book, A Tailchaser Song, which was published so long ago that I think they actually printed it on human skin, because in those days it was cheaper than paper. Somewhere back around the time of the Black Death, I imagine. If you find any of the early editions with little bumps on them on the pages, you'll know, oh yeah, that's one of the Black Death special editions. But anyway, that's a little dark for this time of the night, isn't it? Anyway, so I'm reading Tailchaser Song. We're an introduction and 3 chapters in, and I'm going to pick it up again in just a moment. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to talk about. No, I'm thinking about getting a better webcam, just to bring everything in closer, except for the fact that then I'd actually have to start doing a better job shaving and stuff like that. And that doesn't really mesh with the pandemic, if you know what I mean. So I'll probably wait until we're actually allowed to leave the house again, and then I'll get a good camera, because at that point I'll have to be doing all that stuff anyway. So hello, good evening, good morning, as we used to say on the Tad Williams message board, Gemain, M-A-E-N, morning, afternoon, evening, night, because we had people from all over the globe who were participating in our rather select company, and still are. If any of you want to join us on the message board of tadwilliams.com, lovely group of people, several of whom are on tonight, listening or watching or doing whatever they're doing, using me to keep their cats entertained, as apparently what most people say. I've had so many emails saying, my cat's fascinated by you. I'm like, well, they like small squeaky things, I guess. And that's me. Anyway, speaking of cats, we are now going to get to Tailchaser Song. This is the 50th anniversary paperback edition of this book, which was first published in 1985. I am proud to say it has never been out of print. So this little cat, as I said the very first night, this little cat has been all over the world, has met people I will never meet, and has been translated into languages that even me, with my love of languages, will never hope to be able to speak. So that's where we are, me and the cat. And me and the cat have a long history together, back to the days when I first lived with cats, which was pretty weird, I have to say. Pretty weird indeed. However, those days are gone, although I still live with a cat, Lily, who's sleeping over there, and 3 dogs, large Johnny, small Walter, the rescue Chihuahua. Johnny's a rescue also. And Frank, who was not rescued from anything, and we need to be rescued from him. Oh, although he's old now and he's got health problems, but he's another Chihuahua, and he's a horrible creature. We love him dearly. And Deb actually Frankie has like 100,000 supporters, or whatever you call them, on Twitter. He's a Twitter star. He has more followers than I do. Yeah, that's the word, followers. He has more followers than I do, at 6 pounds of pure fighting fury. No, not fighting fury. Yeah, lazy entitlement, because he is the most entitled dog you have ever met. I won't even discuss all the ways in which Frankie is a horrible creature, but we love him anyway. And of course, our snake, more properly, Tyler's and Devin's snake, are 2 of our young people. Tyler and Devin's snake, Erwin, who is a ball python. So, and 4 young people, and Deb and me, and a buttload of unwarranted and unlicensed critters, vermin, etc., because we live up in the woods. So yeah, we live in the midst of a great deal of biomass. Anyway, so that's the update on who I share these digs with. I am downstairs, of course, in the office, the only quiet place at night, because all the young people are up till god-awful hours, talking loudly, playing video games. It's not unlike living in a college dorm. However, unlike a college dorm, we can actually tell them, shut up, go clean. Not that it always works, but we at least have that right because they're living here and we're paying for it. But our young people are wonderful young people, I hasten to say, and I tease about them and things like that. But we're very fortunate, actually, to be going through the pandemic with such a nice group of young folk, only some of whom are biologically related to us, but all of whom are our family. So anyway, that's where we are. Now I'm going to read. I'm finally going to read. And I'm starting in chapter 4. Those of you who have been following, I will just say, I will assume you remember, but I will just say quickly what we've seen in the first few chapters is how Fritty Tailchaser, young orphaned cat, a hunter child of the folk, because cats refer to themselves in these books as the folk, and specifically of the meeting wall folk, has heard stories about the history of cat kind and where cats come from, and about what you might call cat gods like Vir and Tangalore and Grizraz Hearteater, who's the evil, wicked, bad cat. In real life, of course, there are no bad cats. I had to say that. Anyway, and so Tailchaser's very close friend, Hushpad, who is a female cat, has vanished. And there have been other cats in the area vanishing as well. So the cats of the Meeting Wall clan have sent a delegation to the Queen of Cats at the court of the Queen of Cats. Fritty Tailchaser was too young, but he also is very worried about his friend Hushpad, who he thinks may have been picked up by whatever has stolen these other young cats. And he has, just in a fit of what the ancient Greeks would have referred to as hubris or hubris, he has just promised that he himself is going to dedicate his little kitty cat life to tracking down what happened to Hushpad. And as it said in the very last sentence of chapter 3, after a moment when he realized what he had promised, Fritty began to shiver. And that's where we are. Chapter 4. And sings a solitary song that whistles in the wind. William Wordsworth. Fritty was finding it more difficult than he had expected to leave his porch box and food bowl. The anger and frustration of the night before seemed less moving in the thin sunshine of spreading light. He was, after all, a very young cat, not yet a full-grown hunter. He was not really sure exactly where to begin a search for his lost companion, either. Tailchaser, I heard all about your leave-taking. How astonishing of you! I'm quite taken aback. With a thump and skid, Thinbone leaped breathlessly onto the porch. He eyed Fritty with comical puzzlement. Do you really mean to do it? At that moment, though all his spirit pulled against it, he heard himself say, Of course, Thinbone, I must. Once he had spoken these strange words, he instantly felt as though he were rolling downhill. How could he stop himself now? How could he not go? What would the others think? Mighty Tailchaser strutting about in front of the wall, telling all who passed by about his quest. Oh, to be older, he thought, and not so stupid. Surprising himself, he leaned forward and licked his paw with a calmness calculated to impress his friend. Part of him was fervently hoping Thinbone would tell him not to go, maybe even come up with a good reason. But Thinbone only grinned and said, Hurrah! Fleetpaw and I are very jealous. We'll miss you while you're gone. I'll miss you all very much also, said Fritty, then turned his head away suddenly as if to bite at fleas. After a moment's silence, he looked back around. His friend was watching him with a strange expression on his face. Another moment's silence. Then Thinbone continued, Well, I suppose this is farewell, then. Fleetpaw and Beetleswat and all said to say an especial good luck from them. They would have come by, except there's a big game of bob tag blowing up, and they have to hunt out some more folk to play. Oh, said Fritty, miserably. Bob tag. Well, I don't suppose I'll have much time for that sort of game for a while. Never really liked it much, you know. Thinbone grinned again. I suppose you won't have the time, will you? What adventures you'll have! Looking around, Thinbone scented the air. Did little Pounce Quick ever come by? No, said Tailchaser. Why? Oh, he was asking when you were leaving and where from. Seemed quite concerned, so I supposed he was going to try to catch you and say good journey. He looks up to you quite a lot, I think. Well, I suppose he's going to miss you. Miss me? Yes. Spreading light is almost turned, and you wanted to leave before smaller shadows. Wasn't that right? Oh, yes, certainly. Tailchaser's legs felt as if they were made of stone. What he really wanted to do was crawl back into his box. I suppose it's time for me to be on my way, he said with lame cheeriness. I'll walk you to the edge of the field, his friend replied. As they walked, Thinbone bounding and chattering, Fritty plodding and scuffing, Tailchaser tried to remember and save each smell of his familiar grounds. He bade a silent and somewhat overblown goodbye to the shimmering field of grass, the tiny, nearly dry creek, and his favorite privet hedge. I shall probably never see these fields again, he thought, and they'll all probably forget me in a season or less. For a moment, he felt very proud of himself for his bravery and sacrifice. But when they reached the end of the sea of waving grass, and he turned back and saw the faint shape of the man porch where his box and bowl sat, he felt such a burning in his nose and eyes that he had to sit for a moment and paw at his face. Well, Thinbone was suddenly a little awkward. Good hunting and good dancing, friend Tailchaser. I shall think of you till you return. You are a good friend, Thinbone. Very foul. Very foul. And Thinbone was loping swiftly away. 100 steps into the old woods, and still in the comparatively sunny and airy outer reaches of the forest, Fritty already felt himself to be the loneliest cat in the world. He did not know he was being followed. As the sun rose to midday, Fritty continued into the forest depths. He had never been through it to the other side, but it seemed likely that a fleeing hushpad would go that way, rather than closer to the dwellings of man. Although the sun was high, his keen night vision stood him in good stead, since the trees grew thickly together in these parts. Passing through the thickets and undergrowth, he stared up in wonder at these trees of the inner forest. Trunks curved and twisted, frozen into writhing shapes, like the Hlizza, whose bodies lashed on after they had been killed. Every now and then he stopped to test his claws on one that was unfamiliar to him. Some had bark harder than man ground, others were wet and spongy. Some of the larger ones he sprayed with his hunt mark, more to reassert his own existence among these tangled branches and deep shadows than out of bravado. Above, he could hear the songs of the different flafas that lived in the uttermost heights of the old woods. There was no other sound of life but the padding of his own near silent paws. Then, in a moment, even the birds were silent. There was a single sharp rapping noise, and Tailchaser froze in his tracks. The sound echoed briefly, then faded, absorbed swiftly by the leafy clutter of the forest floor. Then, startlingly, came a rapid clatter of these noises. Tock, 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 from high above him. The crescendo of knocks spread from tree to tree, passing from a point over his head to farther into the forest. Then silence fell again. Apprehensively scenting the air, whiskers stiff, Fritty moved slowly forward, darting glances into the light-spotted reaches of the thick foliage above him. He was cautiously stepping over a decomposing log when there was another sharp "pop," and a moment later he felt a stinging blow to the back of his head. He whirled, shooting his claws, but found nothing behind him. Another sharp blow to his right foreleg spun him around again, and turning, he felt a third harsh pain in his flank. Twirling about from side to side, unable to find the source of the painful blows, he was hit by a barrage of small, hard objects that struck him from above. Backing away, snarling in fear and discomfort, he met another fusillade, this one from behind. Panicking, Fritty broke and ran, and immediately the loud rapping commenced again, from what seemed like all sides at once. The stinging missiles began to fly, thick and fast. Trying to duck his head and protect his eyes, as he scrambled away, he ran directly into the gnarled base of a live oak and tumbled to the loam, where he was immediately bombarded by the fiercest shower yet. As he cowered, he could see the missiles bouncing away, rocks and hard-shelled nuts. The pelting became too much for him once more. As if surrounded by stinging gnats, he crashed away into the undergrowth. When he tried to turn one way, a deluge of chestnuts and small stones would push him back, always in the same direction. As he dove into the shelter of a bramble bush, he felt his paws come down astonishingly on unsolid air. Losing his balance, he toppled forward. As he slid over the precipice and caught a swift glimpse of a dry stream bed a fatal distance below, he twisted his body sharply, managing to catch the bramble bush and slow his headlong plunge. Grappling the prickling branches with all four legs now, and teeth and tail, he found himself dangling precariously over the drop, only the brambles between him and a long, long fall. He hung for a moment, maddened with surprise and terror. Tock! Tock, tock, tock! And another shower of nuts and stones hailed down on him. Fritty began to yowl piteously. "Why are you, ow, hurting me, ow?" he cried, and was rewarded with a hazelnut on his sensitive pink nose. "I've done nothing to harm anyone here. Why are you hurting me?" There was another swift series of knocks, followed by quiet. Then, from the trees above came a shrill, chittering voice. "No harm, it says. The voice was high-pitched and angry. "Liar, liar, liar! You are a killer! Coming here, hunt and kill! Liar, cat, liar!" Although it spoke in a fast-paced and excited way, Fritty could understand its common singing. He struggled for a better grip on the roots. "Tell me what I have done," he pleaded, hoping for time to regain the edge of safety, just a paw reach away. Angry chattering that he could not understand came from all the trees at once. Then the rapping noise quieted the voices again. "We are not stupid nut droppers. No. Bad, so bad, cat. The people of the Rick Chick, not for you to tease and fool. Oh, no. The Rick Chick, the squirrel folk. Even hanging at claw tips from a bramble bush, Fritty felt a moment's wonder. It was known they would hiss and scold intruders and even fight viciously when cornered. They were among the strongest and bravest of the squeaker folk. But band together to attack one of the folk, one who had not even been stalking? It was incredible. "Hear me, oh, Rick Chick," Fritty cried. His claws were beginning to feel the strain. "Hear me. I know your kind and mine are enemies, but that is honorable. We are as we are made. But I promise that I do not intend to molest you or harm your nests. I am searching for a friend, and I will not eat or hunt here. I swear by the first." He waited tensely for a reaction, but the trees were silent. Then a large brown squirrel made his way down the trunk of an aspen, head first and slowly, and stopped not 2 jumps away from Tailchaser's precarious position. The Rick Chick looked angry, its lips pulled back from long front teeth, but it was only 1/4 Fritty's size. He had to admire its bravery. "Tails, teeth, lies! This is what cats is." The squirrel still spoke angrily, but more slowly, and was easier to understand. "Can trust? No. Cat has got mistress were. So bad cats." "I haven't harmed anyone, I swear," cried Fritty plaintively. "Many tooth and claws attack nests. Even now, killing cat has caught my my mate. Caught. Spoiled seeds, unburied nuts, terror. Pains were shooting up Tailchaser's legs, and he was finding it hard to think. He extended a paw carefully to the cliff's edge to relieve the pressure on his hind legs. A stone from a tree above struck the questing paw. He almost lost his grip as he pulled the injured foot back. A shrill chorus of squirrel voices in the foliage above called out for blood. He tried to concentrate on what the brown squirrel was saying. Do you mean that a cat has your mate right now? Nearby? Bones of birds! Horror! Woe! Poor mistress were caught! Caught she is! Fritty seized at the opportunity. Listen to me! Please throw no rocks down. I am at your mercy. I will try to save your mate if you only let me get up from this place. You don't have to trust me. Go back into your trees, and if I try to escape or harm you, you can drop boulders on me, pumpkins, anything. It's your only chance to save her. Tail erect and trembling, the large brown squirrel fixed him with a bright eye. For a moment all was frozen in the tableau. The stone-still squirrel and the small orange cat, grimacing in pain and hanging from a bush above a steep fall. Then the Rick-Chick-Chick spoke. You go, save Chick-Neck, and you free. Word of Master Fizz, sacred oak promise. Follow, we lead you. With a leap and scrabble, Master Fizz was gone into the leafy branches above. Tailchaser carefully pulled himself up to where he could get a better grip, then got his back paws up against the bramble roots for leverage, and jumped to safety. He was weaker than he thought. His muscles trembled as he clambered up onto solid earth, and he lay for a moment, panting. The Rick-Chick-Chick made excited noises among the leaves. He got painfully to his feet, and their chirruping voices led him forward. One of the old trees, on the outskirts of a grove of black oaks, the Rick-Chick-Chick came to a halt. Tailchaser could see what had happened. One of the old trees had fallen over long ago, forming a huge arch. He could hear the frightened crying of a squirrel from beneath it and smell the scent of one of the folk. The sheltering oak shielded the cat so that it could finish its game in peace without being disturbed by the stones and nuts of the vengeful Rick-Chick-Chick. Fritty crept slowly and cautiously around the mop of dead roots that extended from one end of the fallen tree. However he was going to persuade the other cat to give up its rightful hunt prey, he would have to begin with deference and care. So as not to startle, he called, "Good dancing, hunt brother," as he walked under the arching trunk. He stopped short. Mistress Whir, her eyes bulging with panic, lay pinned beneath the paw of a large, sand-colored tom. The hunter raised his head inquiringly as Fritty approached. It was Stretch-Slow. "Well, young Tailchaser." Stretch-Slow did not rise or move his paw from the terrified squirrel, but gave a nod of greeting that was not unfriendly. "Isn't this a surprise? I was expecting you through this area eventually, but waiting is so boring." He started to yawn, then caught himself. "Well, now that you've arrived, would you like to share my catch with me? She's a nice fat one, as you can see. Had quite a bit of fight in her, too. But first, stimulates the appetite." Things were happening too fast for Fritty. "You were waiting for me?" he asked. "I don't understand." Stretch-Slow sneezed humorously at Fritty's bewilderment. "I expect you don't. Well, plenty of time for all that after a toothsome bit of Rick-Chick-Chick. Sure you're not hungry?" Stretch-Slow raised his paw to deal the squirrel a killing blow. "Stop!" Fritty cried. Stretch-Slow was now the one to look surprised. He squinted at Tailchaser with keen interest, as if Fritty had grown a second tail. "What's wrong, youngling?" inquired the older male. "Is this some strange sort of poison squirrel?" "Yes, no. Stretch-Slow, could you let her go?" asked Fritty weakly. "Let her go?" The hunter was genuinely astonished. "Heavenly Vera, why?" "I promised the other squirrels that I would rescue her." Fritty felt as if he were turning to dust under the curious stare of the other cat, dust that would blow away in the next strong breeze. After a moment's careful scrutiny of Fritty, Stretchlow gave an immense huff of laughter and rolled onto his back, waggling his paws in the air. The she-squirrel did not move, but lay still, breathing shallowly, her eyes glazed. Stretchlow rolled to his stomach and gave Fritty an affectionate thump with a large forepaw. "Oh, tail chewer," he wheezed. "I knew I was right. Going on quests, saving squirrel maidens. Whew, what a song yours will be." Stretchlow shook his head from side to side with merriment, then turned his attention back to the huddled Chick. Fritty's nose burned. He did not know if he was being praised or mocked or both. "Very well, then," Stretchlow said to Mistress Whir. "You heard Master Tailchaser. He has interceded for your life. Go now before I change my mind." The squirrel lay still. Fritty began to move forward, afraid Stretchlow had inadvertently broken her back, when she suddenly bolted between them, sending chips of bark flying, and disappeared from beneath the oak tree arch. "I wish I had the leisure to hear your story of how you came to be making promises to squirrels, but there are things I still must do before the eye appears." They were walking together beneath the giant trees, Fritty moving quickly to keep up with Stretchlow. "However, I need to have a more important talk with you. I was sure you would decide to leave on your own, but I miscalculated how soon you would set out, so I have been searching for you since the beginning of Smaller Shadows." "Stretchlow, I'm afraid I do not understand you at all. Not in the least, and I beg your pardon. What could you possibly have to say to a silly youngling like me? And how did you know I would come searching for Hushpad alone? And how did you know which direction I'd choose?" Fritty was gasping faintly as he struggled to maintain the older cat's pace. "Many questions, little hunter. Not all can be answered now. Suffice it to say that I do not learn all I know at the meeting wall. I have wandered far in my day and sniffed many, many things. I do admit that nowadays I derive a great deal of pleasure from sun-soaking. Certainly I do not hunt as far afield as I once did, but still I have my ways. As to your other questions," he continued, "well, even a man-fed eunuch could have smelled your every intention, little quester. I have known since before nose meat, since before you knew yourself, that you would be striking out after little Marshpad." "Hushpad," puffed Fritty. "Her name is Hushpad." "Oh, of course, Hushpad. I know," said Stretchlow with impatience, and perhaps a touch of fondness. "It is my way," he added simply. Stretchlow stopped suddenly, and Tailchaser fumbled to a halt beside him. Fixing Fritty with his great green eyes, the hunter said, "There are strange things afoot, and not just in the old woods. The Chick and the folk making bargains is not the strangest. I cannot sense what is happening with certainty, but my whiskers tell me bewildering stories. You have a part to play, Tailchaser." How could I?" Fritty began to protest, but Stretchlow silenced him with a paw gesture. "I have no more time, I fear. Smell the wind." Fritty inhaled. Indeed, the breeze did carry a strange smell of cold and damp earth, but his senses could make nothing of it. "You must learn to trust your feelings, Tailchaser," said Stretchlow. "You have some natural gifts there that may aid you where your lack of experience leads you into trouble. Remember, use the senses that Mearslar gave you, and be patient." Stretchlow sniffed the air again, but Fritty could no longer smell anything unusual. The older cat then rubbed his nose on Tailchaser's flank. "Keep your left shoulder to the setting sun when you leave the forest," he said. "That should put you in a profitable direction. Do not hesitate to speak my name as recommendation on your journey, and in some fields I am well remembered. Now I must leave." Stretchlow trotted forward a few paces. Fritty, overwhelmed by the events, sat watching him go. The big cat turned around. Have you had your initiation to the hunt, Tailchaser? Disconcerted, Fritty needed a moment to assemble his thoughts. No. The ceremony would have been the meeting after I next. Stretchlow shook his head and loped back toward him. Oh, there's not time nor proper surroundings for the hunt singing, he said, but I shall do the best I can. In a daze, Fritty watched as Stretchlow settled back on his powerful haunches and closed his eyes. Then, in a voice much sweeter than expected, he sang, All Mother the hunt gifts, we praise now, we praise now. Keep us in your eye, our true tales you compass us. The sun is but fleeting, the eye is of always. All Mother, listen us, we pray you, we pray you. Claw, tooth, and bone is our pledge to your light. Stretchlow sat with his eyes tight shut for a moment, then opened them and sprang to his feet again. No trace of the slow-speaking, slow-moving cat that Fritty had known seemed left but the cool gleam in his eyes. He appeared charged with purpose and energy. As he approached, Tailchaser involuntarily shrank back. Stretchlow, however, only reached out and touched his paw to Fritty's forehead. Welcome, hunter, he said, then turned and sprinted away, pausing briefly at the edge of a facing thicket to call, May you find luck dancing, young Tailchaser. With that, Stretchlow vanished into the undergrowth. Fritty Tailchaser sank to the ground in amazement. Had all this really happened? He had been gone less than a day from his home, and yet it seemed forever. Everything was so astonishing. He brought his hind foot up and began to scratch behind his ear as an outlet for the conflicting blur of emotions. As he scratched wildly, his eyes half closed, he sensed movement all around. He leaped to his feet, alarmed. One of the surrounding trees were full of flicker-tailed squirrels. One of the larger ones, not the squirrel he had spoken with earlier, had shinnied down an elm trunk to his own eye level, and it clung there and looked at him. You, cat thing, it said. Now come along, come. Now you talk. Time you talk with Lord Snap. What time is it? Yeah, I think we can get into the 5th chapter here, depending on how long it is, but we'll find out, won't we? Chapter 5. The difficulty to think at the end of the day, when the shapeless shadow covers the sun, and nothing is left except light on your fur. Wallace Stevens. Fritty was climbing high into the treetops. The Rick-Chick-Chick who had summoned him had stayed several branches ahead, leading him upward. Behind, and all about, the rest of the squirrel party were leaping and chattering in their own tongue. He felt as though he had been climbing for days. In the dizzying upper levels of the great live oak, the procession halted for a moment. Fritty sat on a none too wide branch and waited for his breath to come back. Like all cats, he was a good climber, but he outweighed his squirrel companions many-fold. He had to cling tighter and maintain better balance than they, especially up here where the branches were getting thinner. From time to time, a limb had swayed dizzyingly under him, forcing him to climb quickly to a sturdier one. They stopped in one of the last trunk crotches, several large branches flaring out from the trunk of the oak. They had climbed so high that Fritty could no longer see down to the earth below through the overlapping limbs. The fetching party, augmented by scores of other Rick-Chick-Chick, watched him from a safe distance and squittered between themselves in amazement at the sight of a cat in the Lord's tree. His legs aching, Tailchaser was again forced to rise and follow his hosts. After ascending a few more feet up the central trunk, spiraling upward on radiating branches, they turned out along a wide, outreaching limb. Away from the trunk, the bough's circumference became rapidly smaller until Fritty balked for fear that it would not hold his weight. The Rikchik urged him on, though, and he edged forward until he was forced to lie on his stomach and cling. He would go no farther. As he lay, swaying gently in the breeze, the squirrel who had led the party chirped a brief signal. The talking noise that he had heard earlier resumed. Craning his head, Fritty could see several of the Rikchik with nutshells clutched in their forepaws, banging them sharply against the tree's trunk and branches in organized staccato bursts of cadence. From the other side of the treetops, a new round of raps answered. On a branch perpendicular to Tailchaser's, separated from his by several jumps of empty air, a slow and dignified procession was moving. Dignified by squirrel standards, although perhaps a little brisk and hoppy in comparison to the sinuous grace of the folk. Fritty thought he recognized Master Fizz and Mistress Whir near the front of the procession, which contained several pawfuls of Rikchik. Leading the strange parade was a large squirrel with gray-shot fur and an exultantly bushy tail. The old squirrel's eyes were as black as obsidian, and they studied Tailchaser intently as the line of tree dwellers stopped and crouched. After eyeing the cat imperiously for a moment, the old one turned to Mistress Whir. "This cat folk who saved?" Mistress Whir looked demurely across at Fritty, who clung gamely to his branch. "Is most just cat, Lord Snap," she shyly affirmed. Tailchaser could not help but notice how the Rikchik had protected their leader from him, an untrustworthy cat. Out at the end of this wan, thin limb, he had no leverage by which to spring, even if he could manage to. The distance separating his and Lord Snap's branches was too great. Not that he had the urge to spring at anyone at this particular instant. Still, he admired the Rikchik's cleverness. "You, cat," said Lord Snap sharply. "Yes, sir," answered Fritty. What did this old fellow want, anyway? "Catfolk, Rikchik, not friends. You help Mistress Whir. Why you do so strange, cat?" Fritty had not quite puzzled it out yet himself. "I'm not sure, Lord Snap," he answered. "Could have sheltered with Chickneck Stealer under log, broke in Master Fizz suddenly. "Didn't," he added significantly. Lord Snap lowered his head and gnawed meditatively on a twig, then looked at Fritty again. "Always hunt, fight with catfolk. Moon last 4 cat, climb great tree. Steal chickleck, steal younglings, steal many. Who cats?" "I don't know, Lord Snap. I entered the forest only today." "Did you say 4 cats altogether?" "4 so bad cats," Snap affirmed. "1 each leg, Rikchik have 4. "I do not know, my lord, but it is unusual for my folk to hunt in such large numbers," said Tailchaser thoughtfully. Snap deliberated for a moment. "You good cat. Keep promise. Sacred oak binds. First time Rikchik, old cat folk favor since root in ground. Teach you thing. You need help, Rikchik give. Yes?" Fritty nodded, surprised at the offer. "Good cat have troubles. Sing Ricka Snap. Get help. Sing." Fritty tried. Rick Snap. Lord Snap repeated the phrase, and Fritty tried again, troubled by the difficult squirrelish sounds. Over and over he repeated it, tasting the odd chattering feel. All the Rikchik leaned forward, encouraging him, showing him how to make the noises. If Stretchslow saw this, he'd really have a laugh, thought Fritty. Finally, he approximated it closely enough to satisfy the old squirrel lord. "In my so nice forest you use for help. Also sing for certain in trees of brother, Lord Pop. Further, Snap knows not." The old squirrel leaned forward and fixed Tailchaser with his gleaming eyes. Other thing, you hunt Rick Chick Chick? No help. Promise, gone, gone. Rule of leaf and bough. Agree, good cat? Snap looked at him cunningly. Fritty was taken by surprise. I suppose so. Yes, I promise. A gasp of pleasure went up from the attending squirrels, and Lord Snap beamed with delight, showing his worn incisors. Good, most good, he chuckled. Here's bargain, bargain. The Rick Chick Chick chief gestured with his tail to the squirrel who had brought Tailchaser. Master Click, take catfolk down tree. Yes, Lord Snap, said Click. Fritty, sensing the end of his interview, began to inch backward along the narrow tree limb. The squirrels chattered brightly behind him. He thought he heard Whir and Fizz bid him good journey. As he descended behind the brisk and efficient Click, Tailchaser reflected with chagrin on the bargain he had just struck with the Rick Chick Chick. All I have to do is meet the king of the birds and the king of the field mice, he thought sourly, and almost likely starve to death. The waning moments of stretching sun had turned the sky above the great forest into flame. The glow of the setting sun reached through the tangled branches and speckled the leafy ground at Tailchaser's feet. On the eve of his journey's first night, he padded on deeper and deeper into the ancient secrecy of the old woods. He was hungry. He had not eaten since final dancing of the previous day. Suddenly, as if it had been swallowed up by the venomous hound, the light disappeared. In the half moment it took his eyes to adjust, Fritty was blinded. He paused, and as his night vision compensated for the sudden darkness, Tailchaser shook his head and shivered. To live always in darkness. Hurrah! How could the hole-dwellers and burrow sleepers stand it? He thanked the All-Mother for having brought him into the fields as one of the folk who enjoyed all their senses. Continuing on his way with the effortless stealth native to his race, Tailchaser noted the nighttime life of the great woods in its first flowering. His whiskers received the faint heat pulses of small creatures cautiously emerging to test the evening. All their movements were tentative, though, cautious and hesitant. Fritty himself was a factor most of them were already aware of. The small animal that charged headlong from its huddling place at first dark did not usually live long enough to pass its foolishness along to offspring. Thinking of food now, Fritty moved with control, each step coming down on packed ground that would betray no sound. He wanted to find a place where the air currents moved in more favorable ways, or did not move at all. He was going to effect a trap. He had walked hungry for too long, and he did not want to wait for a chance kill. Besides, Grass Nestle, his mother, had taught him hunting lore, after all. He was not going to be forced into digging up squeaker nests for newborns on his first night out. He would make a clean kill. Nightbirds wheeled and soared above. He could feel the presence of the ruhue in silent overflight. They were not hunting, he guessed. The ruhue preferred to search and swoop over flat ground. More likely, they were leaving nests in the nearby forest. Just as well, he thought. The nearness of an owl would freeze the forest creatures and make it that much harder to find dinner. Other night-rising flaffas whistled and piped in the trees up in the farthest reaches where the folk were too heavy to travel. Fritty dismissed them without a second thought. Hopping down into a dry, rock-strewn gully, Tailchaser got a sudden and surprising whiff of cat scent. He turned, muscles tensed, and the smell was gone. In a moment, it was back again, and he breathed it long enough to note some familiarity in the odor. Then, oddly, it disappeared once more. Fritty stood perplexed by this bewildering phenomenon, hackles raised and nose twitching. The scent had not changed in intensity from movement or wind failure. It had simply vanished. His nose wrinkled delicately as he sampled the air, confirming his suspicions. He had walked into a night eddy. a slow, barely detectable whirlwind. The rocks in the dry creek bed, heated by the sun during the day, were warming the air above them. Contacting the cool night air descending, trapped and rerouted by the walls of the gully, the resultant swirl of air made lazy circles, carrying his own scent back to him. If he had not paused for a moment, he would not have been in place long enough for it to circle around. Pleased that he had solved the puzzle, he leaped up to the far side of the stream bed and was moving away when an idea tugged at him. He turned back and inspected the gully wall for several jumps up and down on both sides. He found what he had been looking for, the half-concealed entrance to a squeaker burrow. He knew that the sun warmth would dissipate before too long. He also knew that the trick would work only once. Carefully, he set himself in place, lying atop the gully wall 3 or 4 jumps down the stream course from the burrow opening. He tested the edge of the stream bed wall on which he lay and found a spot that would not crumble under movement and send a shower of earth down to betray his plot. Then, working the catechism that his mother had taught him, he stilled himself into immobility to wait. Unwilling to move his head, he sensed rather than saw that Mirslar's eye had moved but a short distance. When he was finally rewarded by a faint movement at the tunnel mouth, it seemed as if he had waited several lifetimes. Carefully, so carefully, a nose appeared from the hiding hole and sniffed the air. The rest of the squeaker followed. It sat frightened-eyed on the lip of the tunnel for a moment, every movement showing a readiness to run at the first sign of danger. Crouched, with nose wrinkling, it tested for hazard. It was a field mouse, brown, gray, and skittery. Without awareness, Pretty began to flick his tail back and forth. The squeaker, scenting nothing immediately dangerous close by, moved a cautious distance away from the hole mouth and began to search for food. Its nose, ears, and eyes were constantly trained for predators. Never straying more than a quick leap away from its hole, the squeaker scavenged from side to side of the dry stream trough. Fritty found that it took all of his control to not leap down on the mouse that seemed so close. His stomach clenched silently with hunger, and he could feel the impatient trembling of his hind legs. But he also remembered Bristlejaw's admonition to be patient. He knew that the little squeaker would be back down its bolt hole at the first sign of movement. "I will not be a kitten," Fritty told himself. "This is a good hunt plan. I will wait for the proper moment." Finally, he judged that the maze was as far from the burrow as was necessary. When the mouse turned its back on his position for a moment, Tailchaser brought up his forepaw and dipped it slowly over the edge of the gully wall, halting and freezing if the mouse seemed about to turn his way. Gradually, with great care, he stretched his paw down until he felt the faint currents of the night eddy ruffle the fur of his extended foot. The eddy carried the scent around, down the gully walls to circle slowly back up to the mouse from a point seemingly near its own tunnel. As the cat smell reached it, the rodent went stiff, nostrils flared. Tailchaser could see the bound, shivering tension of the mouse as it scented a mortal enemy, apparently between it and the escape route. The squeaker remained frozen in place for several heartbeats as the eddy carried Fritty's scent past it. Then, in an agony of confusion, it made a half-hearted lunge away from the hole mouth toward Tailchaser. All the cat's pent-up energy was discharged at once. His tight-coiled muscles took him over the edge of the stream bed in one motion. As soon as his hind legs touched the ground, he was airborne again. The mouse did not even have a chance to utter a noise of surprise before it died. Following his left shoulder in the way Stretchslow had directed him, Fritty thought about his strange encounter with the older hunter. He had always seen Stretchslow at leisure, an aloof, unapproachable figure, but he had not acted like that today with Tailchaser. He had been different, animated, and energetic. Even more strange, he had treated Tailchaser with great kindness and respect. Although Fritty had been very careful not to offend Stretch Slow in times past, he had certainly never done anything to merit respect from a mature hunter. There was a riddle there that he could not solve as he had the night Eddie. Such a day! How the others back at the wall would laugh and call out at the story of one of the folk learning Rick-Chick-Chick language in the tree of a squirrel lord. But he might never return to Meeting Wall to sing his song. He was of the folk, and his oath would bind him. And now he was a hunter, sung and blooded. Still, the hunter felt very sad and small. Past the midpoint of night, he began to feel a continuous weakness in his tired muscles. He had walked far by the folk's standards, even farther for one his age. Now he had to sleep. Nosing about for a sleeping place, he selected a grassy indentation at the base of a large tree. He sampled the breeze carefully and found nothing to prevent him from bedding down. He turned 3 times around in the small hollow, honoring All-Mother, Golden Eye, and Sky Dancer, the life givers, then curled up, covering his nose with his tail tip to save warmth. He was asleep very quickly. Dreaming, he was under the ground, in darkness. Fritty was struggling, scrabbling at dirt that gave way under his paws, but always there was more dirt. He knew something was hunting him, just as he hunted squeakers. His heart was racing. His scraping paws at last broke through, and he fell through a wall of earth into the open air. There, in a forest clearing, were his mother and siblings. Hushpad stood there too, and Stretch Slow, and Thinbone. He tried to warn them about the thing that was chasing him, but his mouth was full of dirt. As he tried to speak, dust fell out onto the ground. Looking at Tailchaser, his friends and family began to laugh, and the more he tried to indicate the danger they were in from the following thing, the thing that hunted him, the more they laughed, until the sneezing, high-pitched sounds swarmed in his ears. Suddenly he was awake. The laughter had become a high-pitched barking. As he listened, stock still, he could hear it clearly. It was quite close by, and in a moment he identified it, a fox yipping in the darkness beyond the trees. Foxes were no danger to grown cats. Fritty had relaxed back into his sleeping position when he heard another sound, the unhappy mewing of a kitten. He leaped up instantly to investigate, springing out of the copse and down a tree-clouded slope. The barking and snarling became louder. He leaped onto a crest of rock that jutted from a welter of underbrush. Many jumps downslope from him, an adult red fox had backed a small catling against a hummock. The young cat's back was arched, all the fur puffed out from its small body. Still, not a very daunting sight, thought Fritty, not even to one of the weasel. As he jumped down from the rock, Fritty noticed something unusual in the young cat's posture. It was injured somehow, and despite all its loud hissing and spitting, was obviously not in much shape to fight. Fritty felt sure that the weasel knew this too. Then, shockingly, Fritty realized that the fox-cornered catling was Pounceclick. And I think that's where we're going to stop, since that's the end of Chapter 5, and that fits rather neatly. So, a couple of things to mention before I sign off for the night. One of them is for those of you who are saying, I thought this was a fantasy novel. It's just about animals. Well, yes, it is just about animals, but the fantasy elements are coming. If you haven't read the book, don't worry. There's plenty of fantasy elements to come. Secondly, I was going to mention that Stretch Slow, the character of Stretch Slow, is one of the few characters that I've ever done who is directly based on a real person. I can only think of 4 of them, and 2 of them were because they won a contest, a contest for charity at a convention, where Melanie Ron, who went before me in offering something for charity, said, well, if you bid so much, blah, 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 whoever bids the most, I will write them into a sex scene. And, so there I was like, oh, now what do I do to follow? Okay. So I said, well, I can't do sex. I'll do violence. So I told people at the convention that whoever won with the highest bid, that I would be happy to torture them to death in the most grisly possible manner in one of my books, in the Otherland books, I think, because I think I was already writing the second Otherland book. And a couple of guys, in fact, put their money together, won the charity auction, and appeared in, I believe, the second Otherland book, maybe the third one, but I think it was the second one, as two employees of Telemorphics Corporation, the evil corporation in Otherland, which, by the way, is also named after a corporation that I actually used to be one of the two chief officers of. So it was my name, and that's why I used it again in the Otherland books. Anyway, so these two guys are Telemorphics employees who get tortured to death in the books. Those are two of the people. I've forgotten their names now, but they were very nice men who contributed money to charity. And then another character in Otherland is based on a good friend of mine named Barrett Sage Sagar, and that's Blue Dog Anchorite. But Stretch Slow, here in this book, is actually based in large part on my ex-father-in-law. So my father-in-law from my first marriage is a man named Fred Deming. Fred is gone now, but he was a very entertaining guy. He and his wife, Margaret, had both been dancers in the 1940s. In fact, Maggie, his wife, my ex-mother-in-law, who is also gone now, sadly, Maggie was in a ton of Judy Garland movies. So she's in like the Trolley Song and Meet Me in St. Louis and When the Clouds Roll By and a bunch of other Judy Garland vehicles. But so anyway, they were both dancers, and Fred was a very strangely funny, very, very mannered. He was very mannered. He had this kind of Ray Milland, James Mason thing where he would always try to put you off balance by being impossibly, kind of a thing that he did. So anyway, so that's like, that character, Stretch Slow, is one of the only characters based that I've ever written that is actually based on a real person and is not merely a conglomeration of different personality bits and types that I have invented, which is how I usually do it. So anyway, just a bit of trivia there. So I thought you might enjoy that. With that, I am going to wrap it up for the night because it's just a few minutes after 3. Meanwhile, want to say thank you all for showing up, and thank you all for helping to make these evening and morning readings, or whatever they are to you on your end of them, a thing that I look forward to doing. I hope you guys look forward to sharing with me. Anything else? No, I think that's basically it. So I want to say thank you very much for sharing time with me, and bid you a cheerful and good-willed good night from Casa Beale Williams, and hope that all of you are well, that you will continue to take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, take care of your neighbors, take care of everybody you can, because the way we get through things is we help each other out. And I know you're all doing that, and I wish you good luck in continuing it. And I will see you, those of you who are still following the story, in about 16 hours, whatever it is from now, when I read Sunday night my time at 7 and continue with Tailchaser Song. So again, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for dropping me many messages, which I read afterward, because I can't read them while I'm reading, because that's too much reading for even a devout reader to do all at once. So again, thank you very much. Have a lovely Sunday wherever in the world you are.